Candela Obscura, the newest system put out by Critical Role. And while we have yet to see the full book, as it won't be released until later this year, what we have seen does have some positive notes, but, in my opinion, fell short on many more. Everything here could change with the release of the full book, addressing a lot of issues present in the Quick Start Guide and in the first session. But I'm not going to hold my breath. Either way, I wanted to go over what I liked before anything else. As a setting built from the Forged in the Dark system, it's going to be easy to play and understand, which is good, because these sorts of games sometimes can get a bit much. It's a very nice, easy to digest intro to a D6 system, which is a big departure from the D20 system of D&D. As of the Quick Start Guide, it is pretty lore light, which, for a game aiming to be easy to use, is a good thing. Too much lore can bog things down pretty painfully most of the time. It also technically has combat, but it's very clear that this is meant to be a problem-solving game where violence isn't always the best answer. This naturally encourages the GM and players to roleplay solutions rather than just beating up the problem. It avoids the issue of slow combat by just not really having it. I'm not going to speak on the cast performance because, like always, they did a fine job. Whether or not they did or did not act well doesn't really have a bearing on the quality of the system, so discussing it's kind of a moot point. All the things that I put earlier as points in its favor can also be applied to the cons. Now, how much of it goes into either direction is much more up to personal preference. For a system that is meant to be as an intro, it feels too mechanically light, to the point that there isn't much to actually do. At times, it really felt less like a game and more like a lightly guided improv session, which, at that point, why are you using rules? I know this isn't meant to be a long-form game, but it really feels like this system, even for new people, would have so few options that they'd quickly get bored and want to move on to something else. And I am aware that the full book isn't out yet, so there could very well be more options, but with how the character sheets currently look, there isn't much room for improvement or adding things. Yeah, there could be an extra full page, but at that point, we're starting to get into the territory of far more complex than they want to get. And despite the fact that we're already seeing a limited skill pool to try and prevent people from being confused, I gotta say, Strike feels like a trap skill. I know it can be used to like break down doors and stuff, but there are other ways to do that, and for a system that disincentivizes combat, people who want to be, big thug dude are gonna feel kind of like they wasted their time. While we're on the topic, they go out of their way in the Quick Start Guide to talk about how everybody part of this organization is significantly more skilled and trained than the average person. But as far as the rules go, they're going to fail half the time at best. It's a very weird design choice, and one that I feel will produce more feel-bad moments and causing people to bounce off the system and potentially TRPGs in general than getting them to be more engaged. The lore light aspect is also problematic to me because there's really nothing in the context of the current lore that makes me go, wow, this is really interesting. It's a strange mix of craft your own world, but you also should follow our existing canon. To give an example, one of the primary plot hooks in the game to get everybody on the same page and get the players interested starts with, read this to your players. And then it gives a goddamn full page of text. This will take at least a few minutes for the GM to read, assuming they don't flub any of their lines. And I don't know about you, but the chances of anyone I play tabletop games with paying attention through this whole thing and not needing something to get repeated or asking for me to just do it again is gonna be zero. That being said, all in all, it is a quick start guide, so nothing here is truly a deal breaker one way or another for me, but so far it has no wow factor. Take away the Critical Role name and this would be on a pile of people who thought they could make Blades in the Dark better but didn't. And if I were responsible for using this system, for some reason I had to, it would exclusively be to bank on people who are really interested in tabletop games only because of the Critical Role name, and I would do this just to get them to know something other than D&D, but I would also then try and as quickly as possible transition to a similar but more complex and fleshed out system like Blades in the Dark. Okay. This was the part I was really not looking forward to. Not just cons, but legitimate problematic aspects of the game as presented. To clarify, I'm not calling anyone involved in the making of this a bad person or intentionally malicious. However, with that out of the way, with the setting elements as presented,
Gothic fiction doesn't work this way!
let's start by asking a question. What was Gothic fiction created in response to? Like most fiction, it had a very specific type of society that needed to evolve in order to produce it. Gothic fiction, at its core, is spawned from feelings of guilt, dread, and a sense that things are crumbling around you. Not like any of us would know anything about that. This type of fiction was spawned on Knife Crime Island after they had basically sucked the life out of the existing world and were now faced with a growing sense of loss and guilt. One of the most critical parts is that it's extremely self-inflicted. They took over the world. They stole the life and joy out of everything. They are why life feels like it's lost that spark. How does this relate to Okay, quick tangent here. It's a stupid fucking name. Candela Obscura, it means dim candle. There is no way that that is gonna sound good. Now, if it was never used in setting and it was like Disco Elysium, which is used, I think, twice in the whole game, then that'd be one thing. Fine, I can deal. But it is the name of your godforsaken organization, so you're supposed to use it all the time. Candela does not roll off the tongue. It's dim candle, people! That's not cool! How does this relate to Candela Obscura? It's fantasy London without the racism, which, fair. Dealing with problematic racial issues of the time isn't really something most people want in their fantasy world. However, the people of New Fair are the victims. They were invaded by the other. They barely won the war against the other. So they are going for a sort of post-World War I American Civil War, but both of those, like Victorian London, were excessively self-inflicted as opposed to being invaded by some mysterious, faceless other. They want to have the ability to be the victim, but also use the Gothic horror aesthetic, which they're pretty much diametrically opposed. In addition, in the Quick Start Guide, they really had way too many "now be sure to play nice" safety rails. It was a good idea to put in resources at the start where people can sort of organize if something is triggering to them, because that is a very real issue. But constantly stopping the description of an already short guide to say, now remember, mental trauma is real. Like, most of my friends, family, and myself have some form of mental trauma from something. So this isn't me saying that it's not a serious topic, but you don't see things like upsetting movies, games, TV shows have more than in the opening a warning being like, hey, FYI, there are some potentially triggering issues in this. It doesn't pause every 5 minutes to go, now, remember guys. The next topic I wanted to talk about is, again, something I must qualify. I fully support people who wish to be referred to by their chosen pronouns, and I respect their choices. That being said, they have already created a world to not have bigotry in a Gothic setting. Taking that at face value, that means having every NPC with their pronouns feels extremely weird. If you've made a setting where being bi, gay, ace, etc. weren't seen as being weird or problematic, you would just refer to what you like. There's a reason why in modern day we don't have a word for, say, people who don't like spicy foods, even though many people make decisions every single day based on that. In a Gothic setting, it would be far more fitting to get the honorifics right. Mr., Mrs., boss, things like that. all of that would be far more important to the aesthetic than modern pronouns, where you're already in a society where what your gender identity is not problematic. With that being said, I think by far the worst offender is the fact that one of the most vital conceits and the driving force of the setting is pretty goddamn racist. The invading force is just called Otherware. It's a literal great other archetype. Why would you set a game in a sanitized Victorian London-esque setting and still invoke a faceless foreign horde as a source of societal trauma? Even worse, in the information we were given, the main reason for the invasion was that the world was hit with an awful cold snap so terrible that only the Fairlands were doing well at all. So what can we draw from this? The other countries are running out of resources like, I don't know, food. People don't invade for food when they have any at home. Either we have a Bronze Age collapse sea people situation where everyone is banding together in search of anything to help them survive, and the Newfarians were fighting off a starving desperation invasion, or, and this would be much worse, these people were refugees and the Newfarians just massacred them. History written by the victors and all. I don't think this was intended by the designers so much as nobody stopped to think about it, which feels really weird considering how many checks this likely went through during development and that no one bothered to notice. But I'm sure with the release of the full book, they'll detail the outsiders to allow us to understand them better, and that the Newfarians had a very good reason to not share their food and resources with the frozen world. Right? Oh, god damn it, it's a play on Candela Obscura, mother